Phil Mickelson is not sitting at home watching golf on television. He is not doing charity events and smiling for cameras. Right now, at 55 years old, the six-time major champion is pushing for 5 specific rule changes that would reshape how professional golf operates. 5 changes. And the people who run this sport are not in a position to say no to him. Now, think about that for a second. This is the same man the PGA Tour suspended. The same man they treated like he was replaceable after 3 decades of winning. And yet here he is, dictating terms to the very institutions that shut him out. How did that happen? What exactly is he demanding? And why, for the first time, does one player actually have the power to force these changes through? Those are the questions this video answers. All 5, one by one. The reasoning behind each one. The leverage Phil holds that makes him untouchable. None of it is vague. None of it is speculation. Every point is grounded in what Phil has said publicly, what the governing bodies have proposed, and what is happening in the negotiations that will decide the future of professional golf. By the end, you will know exactly what Phil wants, why he wants it, and whether he is going to get it. Personally, I think Phil is right about at least 3 of these 5 changes. Drop your guess in the comments on which area he is targeting first. If you want real golf conversations like this every week, subscribe now. Here is the thing, Phil is not asking anymore. He is telling. He has already made his first move. It was aimed at the one institution golfers trusted most to keep the game fair. To understand why Phil can make moves like that and not get ignored, you have to look at where golf stands right now. The PGA Tour and the PIF are in active negotiations. The framework agreement, the deal that is supposed to reunify professional golf, is still being shaped. Phil is not watching from the outside. He is a LIV captain. He is the public voice for the players who left. He has a financial stake in the league's survival. When Phil speaks, the PGA Tour has to listen, because the Tour cannot close a deal with the PIF while ignoring the players the PIF backs. That leverage is not theoretical. Over the past year, changes Phil talked about publicly before he left have started showing up in the PGA Tour's own decisions. Ideas he raised years ago, the ones people dismissed as bitterness from a player who jumped ship, are now being quietly implemented and called progress. Whether the Tour admits it or not, Phil identified problems in how the sport was run long before anyone else was willing to say them out loud. He was not wrong. He was just early. So when Phil goes after the governing bodies now, he is not doing it as a retired player with a grudge. He is doing it as a man with a seat at the table and the backing of the wealthiest sovereign fund in sports. The institutions that write the rules can ignore a lot of voices. They cannot ignore the faction Phil represents, not with negotiations still open, not with the future of the sport still undecided. Phil knows exactly where to strike first, not some buried policy tweak nobody notices. The one decision that affected every single player the moment they stepped onto the course this season. That decision was the driver length cap. The USGA announced a rule limiting drivers to 46 inches, down from the previous maximum of 48. 2 inches. Sounds small. It is not. For a tour player, 2 inches of driver length changes launch angle, spin rate, and carry distance. It changes how a player attacks a par 5. It changes whether a driver is even the right club off the tee on a tight hole. The USGA framed this as a way to control distance and protect classic golf courses. Phil framed it differently. He called the rule pathetic. He called it stupid. He said it publicly, on the record, aimed directly at the governing body that wrote it. 2 inches was just the start. The USGA's next target is something every golfer on the planet puts in play on every single hole. The golf ball. The R&A and the USGA have been pushing for a ball that flies shorter at the professional level. Their argument is the same one they use for the driver. The game is getting too long, courses are becoming obsolete, and something has to give. Phil disagrees. His position is that restricting equipment for professionals does not fix the real problem. The real problem, in his view, is course design. If a golf course cannot challenge the best players in the world with modern equipment, the course needs to be redesigned, not the ball. You do not punish the athlete to protect the architecture. You redesign the architecture to challenge the athlete. That is the first 2 changes Phil is fighting. Equipment restrictions. The driver cap and the ball rollback. 2 fronts of the same war. Phil believes the governing bodies are solving the wrong problem, and he is not quiet about saying so. He is not writing a polite letter to a committee. He is going public, naming names, and daring the USGA to defend its decisions in front of the players who actually have to live with them. Equipment was the opening move. What comes next hits closer to home. It decides who gets to play in golf's biggest events, who gets locked out. The third change Phil is pushing for has nothing to do with clubs or balls. It has to do with who is allowed to compete in major championships. Right now, LIV golf events do not award OWGR points. That means LIV players who are not exempt through other channels, past major wins, top 50 rankings, sponsor invitations, cannot qualify for events like the US Open through the normal pathway. When the USGA adjusted its exemption criteria, players like Tyler Gooch were left out of the US Open despite playing well all season. Phil did not hold back. He called USGA CEO Mike Wan's decision a dick move on social media. He demanded that majors create objective, inclusive qualification pathways that do not punish players for choosing to play on LIV. This is not just about one player missing one tournament. This is about whether an entire league's worth of players gets permanently shut out of golf's biggest stages. If the majors keep their current exemption structure, LIV players will age out of contention without ever getting a chance to compete for the trophies that define careers. Phil knows this. He is 55. He has 6 majors. He is not fighting for himself here. He is fighting for the players on his team and across the LIV roster who are in their prime and deserve a shot. Phil was willing to fight the USGA for other players. What surprised people was his willingness to fight his own league just as hard. The fourth change is one Phil is willing to make within LIV itself. Right now, LIV golf plays 54 holes over 3 days with a shotgun start. Traditional golf is 72 holes over 4 days. Players like John Rahm have pushed for LIV to move to 72 holes, expand field sizes, and drop the shotgun format. Phil has said publicly that he is open to all of it. He is not defending LIV's format out of loyalty. He is evaluating it the same way he evaluates the USGA's rules. Does it serve the game, or does it serve the brand? If 72 holes makes LIV more legitimate in the eyes of fans and players, Phil will take it. He will change his own league's rules before he lets the sport write LIV off as a gimmick. That willingness to criticize his own league is what makes his other demands harder to dismiss. He is not just pointing fingers outward. He is holding up the same mirror at home. The next change he is targeting proves he was right about problems nobody else wanted to name. The fifth change is the most personal one, and it is the one that has already started happening. Before Phil left for LIV, he argued publicly that the PGA Tour's structure was broken. He claimed the tour hoarded profits. The media rights deals, he insisted, enriched the institution while the players who generated the product got a fraction of the value. The tour's restrictions on player movement and event requirements, he maintained, treated grown men like employees instead of partners. People called him bitter. They said he was making excuses for leaving. Then the PGA Tour announced structural reforms. Smaller fields, fewer tour cards, player equity stakes in PGA Tour enterprises. The exact kinds of changes Phil had been talking about for years. The tour did not credit him. They did not mention his name. They just made the changes and called them progress. Phil was not wrong. He was just the first person to say it out loud, and it cost him his place on the tour. The tour made the changes Phil demanded without ever saying his name. What they never explained is how one man ended up with enough power to force their hand. 3 sources of leverage. First, PIF money. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund is in active negotiations with the PGA Tour. The tour cannot finalize its commercial future without addressing what LIV players want. Phil is a LIV captain and the public face of that faction. Second, legacy. 6 major championships, 45 PGA Tour wins, Hall of Fame credentials. Phil cannot be dismissed as a fringe voice or a disgruntled player. His record speaks for itself. Third, the antitrust angle. LIV players filed an antitrust lawsuit against the PGA Tour. That legal pressure, even as the specifics evolve, keeps the tour at the negotiating table. Phil does not need to threaten anyone. The structure of the sport gives him a seat whether the tour likes it or not. Leverage explains how Phil can make these demands. What it does not explain is why a man with 6 majors and a locked-in legacy is still fighting this hard at 55 years old. The answer is not money. Phil made more than enough to walk away and never think about golf again. The answer is not revenge, at least not entirely. There is a personal wound here. The PGA Tour suspended him. They treated 30 years of winning, of showing up, of selling tickets and growing the sport as if it counted for nothing the moment he chose a different path. That stings. Phil is not pretending otherwise. This fight is about legacy. Phil wants to be remembered as more than a great player who left for a bigger paycheck. He wants to be remembered as the man who broke golf's monopoly and forced the sport to treat its players like partners instead of property. The equipment rules matter to him because he believes golf should reward creativity and shot making, not punish athletes for using the best technology available. The exemption rules matter because he wants LIV to be recognized as legitimate, not as a sideshow that disqualifies its players from the events that define careers. The structural rules matter because he genuinely believes players were undervalued for decades, and he was the first one to say it at a level loud enough to matter. There is also the personal reckoning. Phil chose LIV. He chose the money. He chose the league that offered him the biggest number. He knows that. He is not pretending he made a purely principled stand. What he is saying is that the problems he identified were real, and the tour's refusal to fix them is what pushed players out in the first place. He wants the tour to acknowledge that, not to apologize. Just to admit he was right about the disease, even if they hate him for the medicine he chose. Is Phil a reformer or a man settling a score? The next few months will decide which version of him history remembers. So here is the full picture. 5 changes. The driver length cap, which Phil called pathetic. The golf ball rollback, which he sees as the same problem wearing a different shirt. Major championship exemptions, which he wants open to LIV players. LIV's own format, which Phil is willing to overhaul to make the league more legitimate. And the PGA Tour's structure, which is already shifting in the direction Phil demanded years ago. 5 changes, 3 aimed at the governing bodies, 1 aimed at his own league, 1 already happening whether the tour credits him or not. That is what Phil is demanding. That is why he is demanding it. That is how he has the power to push it through. You now know everything. The question left is whether one player, no matter how accomplished, should have this much influence over the rules of a sport. Phil's defenders say he is fighting for player rights, for modernization, for fairness. His critics say he is using PIF money to hold golf hostage and rewrite the rules to benefit himself. Both sides have a point. The tour did underpay players. The USGA does make equipment decisions that feel disconnected from the professional game. Phil did choose the biggest check. He did walk away from the institution that built his career. This is not a story with a clean hero and a clean villain. It is a story about power, leverage, legacy, and the messy reality of a sport trying to figure out what it wants to be. Phil is not going to save golf. He is not going to destroy it either. He is going to force it to make decisions it has been avoiding for 20 years. Whether those decisions make the sport better or worse depends on who you ask. None of this is settled. The PIF negotiations remain open. LIV is still adjusting. Phil is still speaking. The next season will decide whether golf reunifies or splits for good. That is what makes this moment different from every other controversy Phil has been part of. In 2022, when he left for LIV, people thought it was a tantrum, a rich man taking his ball and going home. 3 years later, the PGA Tour is restructuring. The USGA is defending its equipment policies on national television. LIV is adjusting its format to look more like the tour it was built to challenge. The sport is not the same. Phil made sure of that. Whether you think he is a hero or a villain, you cannot say he did not change things. You cannot say he was quiet. You cannot say he let the institutions that shut him out pretend nothing happened. He forced a conversation that golf needed to have, even if most people did not want to have it. That conversation is not over. The framework agreement is not signed. The exemption rules have not been rewritten. The ball has not been rolled back. The driver has not been uncapped. Every single one of these 5 changes is still in play. Phil will be back on the course this season. He will be in the captain's chair for high flyers. He will be in the room when the PIF and the PGA Tour sit down to negotiate the next phase. He will not be quiet. He has never been quiet. That is the whole point. If you want real golf conversations like this, subscribe now and tell me in the comments whether Phil is a reformer or settling a score. I read every single one.